Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I did not plan to live inside a steel drum in the sky. I spent years on the ground, measuring footings, calculating wind loads, and certifying welds on county tanks that most people never noticed. That was before the first alerts called it an unusual cluster of violent rabies cases, before the emergency rooms filled, before the traffic lights froze to blinking red, before my radio at the county water office barked out the last clear message, and then turned to a hiss that I could feel through my jaw. By the time anyone said the full words, neuropathic reanimation virus, South Missouri was a map of closures, and I could name every pump station that would fail if there were no crews to rotate the valves. I am Ethan Cole, 35, structural engineer for the county's water infrastructure division, until the day we locked the office and taped a printed notice to the glass that no one would read. I watched schedules collapse and supply routes choke on their own good intentions. Patients were moved into a dam shelter upcountry. The idea was to isolate and stabilize there. A storm hit, the backup generator failed, and the shelter turned into an engine for panic. When people fled back downriver, they brought the infection with them. I kept coming back to the same conclusion, no matter how I tried to outcompute it. Centralized systems were our strength until they became our weakness. If I wanted to stay alive, I needed height, visibility, and a simple design that I could maintain alone. The old agricultural water tower southwest of town had all three. I left at 6:40 a.m. while the sky was colourless and low. I took the Ford F-250 I had kept running by habit more than need, loaded the bed with what fit, and left what did not. I took my climbing harness and twin lanyards, the key set for municipal access hatches, cordless angle grinder with extra discs, a small 120 amp flux core welder, a propane camp stove, my tool bags, 2 deep cycle marine batteries, a multimeter, a hammer drill, a spool of 12 gauge wire, the handheld radio, 3 roll-up solar panels salvaged from a county RV project, a coil of rope, several ratchet straps, a first aid kit, and a small rifle that I'd carried in the truck for deer season but rarely used. I took food that would not rot quickly: rice, oats, canned beans, peanut butter, electrolytes. I took a water filter, and I took my own stubbornness. I did not take any assumption that help was coming. The tower sits on a low rise near a drainage basin that feeds a creek when it rains. It is a multi-column elevated tank, the kind with a shallow bowl above a ring of lattice and legs like a stilted spider, painted a chalky white that had given up its gloss years ago. 4 steel legs sit on square concrete footings, tied together by cross-bracing. A central riser feeds up through the bowl. The maintenance ladder runs up the riser to a caged section and then to the platform that girdles the tank. The manway into the bowl is on the north side. I know that because I signed off on its last inspection. I also know the wind exposure category, the gust factors, and the comfortable deflection the legs accept when a storm leans into them. I parked in the grass, shut the engine, and just listened to the empty morning. Chortun, the first hour was simple, only because I had done these moves 100 times, and because steel feels honest under your hands. I cut the chain on the lower ladder gate and swung it open, climbed to shoulder height, and used the angle grinder to cut the first 6 rungs off, then another 4. That turned the ladder into an obstacle. From the ground, it became a wall. I left a short section intact and fixed a pulley there with a bolt through the ladder side rail. I rigged a length of good rope into a haul line. I wore the harness, clipped in with my lanyard, and climbed slow and correct. Somewhere not far away, a single dog's bark turned into a broken howl and then stopped. I climbed faster. At the platform, I tested the railing, tapped the welds, and ran my glove over rust that came off on my palm like red chalk. The platform circled the drum, flat and familiar. The view, a full sweep of fields, a power line cut, 2 barns, and the thin road where, on a different morning, a school bus would have cut the corner too tight. I unlocked the manway cover and checked the interior. The bowl had been drained years ago, leaving flaking interior paint and a smell like wet pennies. The space was big enough to sleep in, but not healthy without proper ventilation. My home would be the platform. I bolted down the manway cover, making sure the gasket seated. I lowered the haul line, clipped my tool bags to it one by one, and walked the rope through the pulley by hand to raise each load. The welder came last. I fixed 2 eye bolts into the platform grating to anchor a small retractable ladder I had brought, a rope ladder with hardwood rungs, and a locking cam I had machined at the shop the week before everything closed. I could lower it to climb up. From the platform, I could pull it back up, tie it off, and make the last 10 feet impossible for anyone who did not have rope and time. I welded small tabs onto the ladder's side rails and the platform angle so I could hinge and pin the ladder in place if needed. The heat of the weld made the metal smell like rain on hot pavement. When it cooled, I tapped each bead with the chipping hammer and listened for a clear ring. I set the panels in a line on the south edge of the platform where they would get the longest path of sun, screwed them into treated boards so a gust would not flip them, and wired them to a small charge controller and the deep cycle batteries. I mounted the batteries on a plywood box to keep them off the grated floor and strapped them to the platform braces. The multimeter read good voltage. The panels started feeding. I ran a fused 12-volt line to a marine socket for the radio and another to a small LED floodlight I angled down over the ladder. The stove went on a steel tray with a rim. Propane bottles stood to the side. As the day stretched, I built what I needed before the first evening. I strung paracord lines below the platform and tied lengths of scrap metal to them, old bolts, washers, a loop of chain, so they would ring if anything brushed them. I collected a bucket of loose gravel from the basin and placed it in small cloth bags that I could drop as sound makers. I rigged a makeshift motion alarm using a battery-powered driveway sensor aimed toward the base of the ladder. Its receiver chirped softly through the handheld radio's external speaker. A transistor, a speaker, and that little box are not a wall, but they give a person time to decide. At 5:10 p.m, I sat with my back to the tank shell, ate cold beans out of a can with my pocket knife, and made a list. The list had sections: power, water, shelter, observation, defense, communications, contingency. Under power, I wrote add second panel set from RV at quarry. Under water, I wrote gutter and funnel, tank drip edge, food grade drum, boil. Under shelter, I wrote tarp windbreak, sleeping pad, tool rack. Under observation, I wrote binoculars, mirror to signal, mark distances, range cards. Under defense, I wrote fire hose sand snakes, trench, fuel traps, ladders as choke points, drop ladder after dark. Under communications, I wrote antenna gain, weather scan, emergency channels. Under contingency, I wrote emergency descent, secondary exit, cache below with spare gear. I slept in my coat the first night with the harness clipped to an eye bolt because I do not trust my own balance when I'm too tired. The wind moved through the lattice under me and made a sound like a slow instrument. I woke twice because the metal chimes whispered, and once because the driveway sensor chirped and then went quiet. I used the red light on the headlamp and scanned ground. An antlered buck stood near the basin, still as a statue, his head turned. He moved on. By the third sunrise, routine had started to settle in my bones. I built a rain catchment system that would not look like much to anyone else. I cut a length of gutter from a barn and mounted it on brackets under the slight overhang of the tank shell. The tower bowl is a dish. Water running down its skin will drop from the edge. The gutter caught that drip line and fed it into flexible hose that ran to a food-grade polyethylene drum strapped inside the platform's inner ring. I added a sediment pre-filter with a simple mesh screen and a coarse carbon filter. I still boiled every pot. I wrote rough numbers on the drum with a marker to estimate volume. I marked a small dipstick to track daily use. From the quarry yard 2 miles away, I brought back a pallet with 4 small solar panels and a plastic tub full of hardware. Hauling took 2 trips and most of a morning. I used the truck on back roads, sat idling at 3 intersections until I could say no one was watching, and then drove the last stretch with the window down to hear what the wind carried. When I hoisted the pallet up the ladder, I felt the load through my shoulders and thought about how a person becomes a crane when there are no cranes left. On the 4th evening, I saw fire in town. It climbed a service station roof and held there like it had something to say. Sirens rose from a distance, cut off, and then rose again from somewhere else, like they were unsure of their own purpose. Around 10 p.m., the radio caught a voice on an emergency channel. I do not know whether the man on the mic imagined that someone would answer, or if he was recording last messages for himself, but his voice brought an absence with it. The message named a quarantine line and asked anyone in Range 3 to shelter in place. Range 3 was the county fairgrounds. I had driven by there 2 days earlier. The fence was down. On the 6th day, I saw people. I'd been spotting from the platform with a pair of 8x42 binoculars that I kept in a padded bag. I worked the glass calmly, the way I had trained myself to inspect welds for porosity or track a bolt head for rounding. 2 figures moved along the power line cut, stopped, moved again. When they stepped into the open near the drainage basin, I saw that there were 3, an adult woman, an adult man, and a kid. The kid carried a backpack that looked too full. The woman wore scrubs and a fleece jacket tied at her waist. The man moved like he was used to carrying engines and did not want to do that anymore. They spotted the tower, and then they spotted the light I had angled down the ladder. They looked up. If the world had been ordinary, I would have climbed down and introduced myself and shaken hands and asked where they were from. The world was not ordinary. I let the rope ladder down and stood behind the parapet of the tank shell with the rifle on the grating, the muzzle pointed at a brick wall 50 miles away. "Stop at the base," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a different person. "Hands where I can see them. No sudden moves." The woman rested her hands on her head. The man held his at his sides. And the kid just watched up the ladder, like he was deciding whether to learn a new rule. "We're not looking for trouble," the woman said. "We saw your light last night. We just need a place to rest." I heard her breath through the words. "I'm Alma. I'm a nurse. This is Derek. He's a mechanic. The kid is Caleb. We were at the Jefferson County Medical Overflow site. It went bad." She did not specify what bad meant. She did not have to. "We can trade labor and food," she said. "We have batteries." I told them to show me their wrists and necks for any breaks in the skin. They understood why. I told them to turn around slowly. The man did not like being told what to do by someone he could not see, but he did it anyway, and I could feel that this counted for something. I told them they could climb one at a time, slowly, with me watching. I told them when to stop on the ladder so I could check their hands again before they reached the platform. I told myself not to forget the rules I had decided on, just because people looked tired. Up close, Alma's face had that fixed calm that nurses use when rooms are busy and the numbers on the monitor do not match the oxygen in the patient's blood. Derek's hands had dark under the nails that would not wash out without a brush. Caleb did not try to be older or younger than he was. He looked at the platform and the equipment like he might understand it if he stared long enough. I laid out my rules. We work quiet. We do not make light at night except shielded and downcast. We boil everything. We rotate watch. No one leaves the ladder down. If you are sick, you say it first. They accepted without bargaining because the ladder was the bargain. They spread their things where I pointed and held the space like guests who understood that eating at your table meant they would help wash dishes with water you did not waste. That night, I moved the sleeping pad so that the 4 of us were head to toe. I did not clip my harness because I wanted to be able to move quickly, but I also did not sleep fully. In the early morning, when the cold goes under your jacket, I heard a voice low and careful. Alma was whispering to Derek about her last shift, about the doors that did not stay shut, and the bed alarm that kept going off because someone had stood up and never lay down again. She told it like a report, and Derek listened like a person who used to fix things that had names. Days found a rhythm that was not restful, but was human. We set watches from dusk to dawn in 2-hour blocks, because 2 hours is an amount of time you can imagine when you're tired. We took turns boiling water, cooking rice, and rotating the panels to kill shade. Alma scavenged the foot of the hill for clean containers and returned with a box of mason jars and lids, a small pump sprayer we could repurpose, and 4 lengths of old fire hose coiled and stiff. Derek cleaned the rope pulleys until they turned like they were new again. I taught Caleb how to check a weld by sound, and he taught me a trick to hold the rope ladder steady against the wind using a weight and a slip knot that he said he used when he raked leaves onto a tarp. We needed food that did not come out of tins. On the 9th day, Derek and I went down at 11:20 a.m. when the light was strong and the views were long. We stuck close, moved behind the lattice legs, and checked the basin where the ground holds damp even in heat. We found a patch of wild onions and dug them with a flat bar from my bag, washing the bulbs in a shallow pool. I kept the rifle slung and my hands free. A shape moved in the trees and stopped because something in it recognized something in us. We returned to the ladder with slow honesty and climbed, onions in a pocket. Alma diced them small and added them to the rice with salt. We ate with our backs against steel. Noise is a magnet. The second week taught us that with a lesson that did not need words. Midday, a pair of low-flying helicopters passed east to west, their rotors bright against the air. The sound reached into the trees and pulled the wrong things into the light. Figures moved out from shadow, too many of them. They did not hurry. They just turned in the direction of the sound, and then towards the tower where the sound had echoed. The driveway sensor chirped once, and then became a steady alert until we switched it off. The first of the infected reached the base of the tower and stood there like they had found a landmark. A woman in a winter coat, though the day was warm. A man in a reflective vest. A boy younger than Caleb. They tilted their heads as if listening for instructions and then simply remained, as if the tower were a tree they had chosen. We had planned for it. We had the first layer of passive defense, distance, elevation, silence. The ladder was a gap. The second layer was the ground we had reshaped. Derek and I had spent 2 afternoons with a trenching spade and a mattock, cutting shallow trenches in a circle at 8 meters from the base, breaking up the soil and sinking old pallets into it. Over those pallets we laid fire hose we had filled with a mix of sand and gravel, heavy snakes that conformed to the ground and did not roll when stepped on. The idea was simple: weight shifts, feet slip, movement slows. Inside that ring, we drove metal stakes with loops we could run line through to trip ankles in the dark. I set stakes in a pattern that made sense to me, and then I taught it to the others until they could walk it with their eyes closed. We also built what I called the silent line. We hung strips of torn cloth from low wires running between rebar stakes. The cloth caught the wind and masked our own wind sounds. When anything brushed those cloth strips at night, it made a softer sound than a person does when they're trying to be quiet. That way, the unique sounds that matter to a person on watch could stand out. We used the driveway sensor only when none of us felt steady. Machines can fail, but a brain can fill silence with its own trouble. Using both made sense. The first close call came 3 days later when a thunderstorm rolled in from the southwest with a line of black under it. At 8:15 p.m, the sky flashed white. The delay was short, and the crack of sound pushed through me. I tied off the ladder and pulled it up with Derek's help. We pinned it against the platform and swung a hinged plate over the last exposed rung. Rain hit the bowl and ran off in a sheet. Our gutter caught what it could. The overflow became a sound like 1,000 pebbles being poured through a funnel. The wind pushed the tower. The whole structure moved the way it was designed to, flexing, not fighting. You feel that through your feet the first time, and your mind has an argument with itself about whether to trust the math you wrote on paper years ago. Then the argument ends because you do not have a choice. The storm brought the infected in numbers. Thunder and light seemed to call them. Shadows reached the base of the tower, and then hands reached for legs that were not steps. They tried to climb the lattice where there were no useful holds. A man in a soaked shirt found the lower ladder and touched the cut end where I had removed the rungs. He scraped his fingers on the steel, and then reached again as if repetition might grow metal. We stayed quiet. We kept everything dark except a single shielded light aimed straight down so that it blinded anyone looking up and left our faces in shadow. Alma counted the shapes out loud in a whisper and then stopped because counting turned into a kind of tally that felt like a promise we did not want to make. Lightning tripped our charge controller twice. The panel snapped offline and then back with a click. I took the LED down and ran the radio on a battery directly to a socket because I did not trust the lines not to pick up noise. We conserved. We waited. The night was long in the way that makes your joints ache in advance because the muscles around them do not know when they will need to act. When dawn came, the storm had moved on. The bowl shed its last sheets of water, and the ground around the tower was a slick of mud cut by the outline of the hose barriers. The infected did not move like they were cold. They simply remained until the sun rose higher and then wandered away, as if drawn by something else we could not see. After that, our plan shifted from temporary to durable. We decided that if we were to stay, we needed redundancy for the essentials and a way to move heavier loads without risking a fall during a time when hands might shake. Derek and I built a hauling frame from 2 square-section steel rails I had found in a machine shed. We clamped them to the platform through bolts and constructed a small A-frame crane with a swivel pulley. With a 1-to-4 block and tackle and a cleat, we could lift 50-pound loads one-handed and tie them off while the other hand worked. We kept the system simple because a simple system can be repaired without parts catalogs. We needed more water storage. Alma found 4 blue barrels with tight-sealing lids behind a closed lawn supply store. We rinsed them with a dilute bleach solution, dried them in the sun, and lifted them one at a time. The tower now had a ring of drums like a belt, each marked with a fill line and a date. I tracked daily use with a clipboard and a blunt pencil. We brought up a manual bilge pump and a length of hose. From the drums we could fill a pot without moving a barrel. We built a heat shield around the stove with scrap sheet to keep flames from licking where they should not. We set an ABC fire extinguisher within reach, bracketed to the shell. A week later, Alma and Caleb were on watch at 2 a.m. when someone called up from below. The voice was close, but not at the ladder, trying to aim at us without making noise that carried. "Please," the voice said, "we're not sick." I took the light, angled it, and saw 2 people crouched near the base inside the hose barrier. A woman and a man, not young, not old. They had a cart with them, one of those foldable garden carts with big wheels. On it sat a car battery, a plastic tub, and what looked like a sealed case for tools. They raised their hands without me having to ask. I told them to stand clear of the ladder and not to touch anything that looked like it had a purpose. They understood. We tested them the same way we tested Alma and Derek and Caleb. We looked for injuries that did not make sense. We asked simple questions that are easier to answer honestly than to fake. Name, town, where they slept last night, what they ate most recently, whether they had shared a room with anyone who had a fever in the last 2 days. The woman said her name was Tamsin, that she used to work at the county library, that she had good eyes for reading and organizing anything with labels. The man said his name was Richard. He used to install garage doors and could run wire straight when you needed it straight. They had walked from a subdivision that the map calls by a hopeful name and that they did not want to describe any further. They brought the cart as offering. We did not have room for every person who might ask, but we did have work that needed hands that knew what a wire nut is and how to use it. We lowered the rope ladder and took them up. I made the rule clear. Anyone who was here worked, and anyone who worked had a say. We placed the cart on the platform and opened the tool case. Inside was a good crimping tool, heat shrink tubing, and a voltmeter that still read steady. Finding that meter felt like the day a package arrives with the part you have been waiting for. Old life sneaking into new life, in a way that helps rather than hurts. The next afternoon, a small group of infected found the tower again. We watched how they moved when they met the hose barrier and the trip lines. Their feet slid as expected, and the lines did what lines do. Caleb pointed to a place where one figure found an angle, and we marked it with a rock so we could tighten that line later. We did not fire a shot. We did not throw anything. We did not call out. We learned to be a mirror that shows the world back to itself without adding new edges. Noise came to us anyway. At 5:50 p.m, a pickup with a dented hood turned onto the thin road near the basin, rolled to a stop and idled. 2 people sat in the cab. The engine ticked and then died, then cranked and caught again. The driver got out, looked up, shaded his eyes. He called, asking whether we had seen a group. His group, he said, who had left a mark at a mailbox north of the creek. He said they should have been north of here, and he could not find them. He tried to sound like the kind of person who helps, but his eyes measured the ladder. There are games you can play on the ground that you cannot play at a height where a wrong footstep goes through to open air. We told him that we had not seen his people and that he should keep moving because staying still invites attention. He did not like that. He said we were cowards. Then he left. 5 minutes later, 2 more infected wandered from the tree line, drawn to the voice he had thrown at the sky. We took turns that evening, standing at the rail and watching the fields. The sun set behind a filigree of branches, and the colours did what they have done every night since I was a child. I told Derek how the tower moved in the wind and why that movement matters. I told him how the transition from fixed base to flexible mast keeps loads out of the connections, and how the legs are happiest when they're asked to do the job they were designed to do. He listened and then pointed up and said, "So this thing wants to live?" I said, "Yes, that is one way you could put it," and then let the thought sit because it helped. The plan improved because the plan met reality. Our pulley systems became faster to operate. We marked the ropes with tape so we could hit the same lengths in the dark. We drilled small drain holes in the platform where water pooled, and we filed their edges so they would not cut fingers. We added a windbreak using tarps and conduit. With the right angles, we could deflect rain without building a sail. Tamsin organised our supplies and put labels on bins that made finding anything easy, even with one eye closed. Richard and I ran a coax up a pipe and mounted a small antenna on a mast above the tank. The handheld radio's range increased. At noon, we swept frequencies and wrote down any call signs we heard. We found a weather broadcast. We heard a voice identify a site called Jefferson Base. The map in my head placed that near Jefferson City, a group coordinating National Guard operations. The voice was strong but did not invite conversation. It was a beacon, not a call. Defensive upgrades came next because we were running out of luck. We anchored narrow platforms around 2 of the tower legs at 8 feet above ground level, hinged and ratcheted to draw them up when not in use. If we needed to descend and work within the hose barrier, we could do it from those perches, with a line of retreat that did not put our boots on the muck until the last moment. We placed a short ladder that could hook onto the lowest rung and be pulled up with a rope. I made Caleb practice pulling and stowing it until his hands knew the order. We also prepared something I did not want to need, a fuel barrier that could be triggered to produce heat and smoke without turning into a fire that would take our tower. I do not write this as instructions for anyone. I write it because it was part of our decision tree and because we were careful. We filled 3 shallow trenches outside the hose line with damp leaves and scrapwood soaked in diesel. Diesel is less volatile than gasoline. It is easier to control and less likely to flash. We covered those trenches with sheet metal to keep rain off. If we needed a wall of smoke and heat to push a group back from the ladder, long enough to climb or hoist something heavy, we had a plan to light it at 3 points and to monitor it from the platforms. Fire can be a tool or a mistake. We made it a tool we hoped not to use. At 3:05 p.m. 2 days later, the battery on the handheld radio bit into the plastic with the way it does when a strong signal arrives. I lifted it and a voice, calm, clipped, higher than I expected, came through. Jefferson Base has established landing windows for rotary assets along Corridor Red. Visual signal required. No flares within timber. Repeat. Visual signal required. Avoid timber. Identify with orange smoke or reflective panel. If you can hear this, stay clear of roads after dusk, the voice repeated. We looked at each other and then at the piles of things we had been saving, because we never knew when the world would ask for them. We had no orange smoke. We had the bright side of an emergency blanket and a mirror. That night we talked. The question was simple. Do we turn the tower into a beacon and try to bring a helicopter here? Or do we keep the tower a secret and go looking for a landing zone stripped of trees where we could signal? The fields around us were ridged. The basin was too low. The road was clear but narrow, with utility lines along it. Lines kill helicopters. The power line cut might serve, but it was not wide, and poles would stand like bad ideas at the edge. If a helicopter tried to set down there, we would bring rotor wash down into a crowd we did not invite. The other option was to remain quiet and try to reach a different signal point by foot, with a panel at the right time. Any option required moving on the ground and making noise. We set a decision rule. We would signal only if we could control the ground. Control meant our barriers were intact. Our ladder was raised. Our water was topped. Our fuel trenches were ready but safe, and we had eyes on the approaches. We picked a time window for the next afternoon, when winds tended to be calmer here, and the light gave good contrast for a panel. We practiced flashing the panel from the platform railing. Short, sharp hits rather than a sweep. The way you make a signal stand out from a glint. The morning of the decision smelled like wet grass. We checked our lines. Derek tightened a stretched tripwire. Caleb put new stones on the edge of a trench where mud had filled it. Alma boiled water early so the stove would be cool by the time we needed the space clear. Tamsin bundled our signal items in a bag and tied it to a cleat. I climbed the mast to check the antenna mount, because I always checked the thing that carried my voice. At 1:40 p.m, the radio caught rotor noise before the sky did. We took positions. I held the panel. Derek stood at the ladder crank with Caleb at his shoulder. Alma had the radio. The helicopter came east to west at mid-altitude, grey and lean. We flashed. It did not turn. We flashed again. I felt very small and very exposed, holding a square of light at a tower's rail. Then it banked, slow, deliberate. It made a wide curve and came back at reduced speed, nose slightly down. Alma keyed the radio on the emergency channel and said, calm as if she was calling a clinic for a transfer bed, "Aircraft on red corridor near mile marker 32 southwest of county line. We have a panel. We have a clear tower. We are 4 survivors with a 5th possible. We do not have orange smoke." The helicopter drifted, then hovered. Hovering over trees is a risk. Pilots do not hover if they can avoid it. The voice we had heard the day before came through our radio like it was in my ear. "Tower group, we see you. We cannot land at your position. Can you relocate to an LZ clear of obstructions?" I looked at the power line cut and then at Alma. "Negative on immediate relocation," she said, steady. "Ground unsafe." She paused, then added, "We can mark a road and orient vehicles to indicate wind if you can hold. Otherwise, advise." Silence for a heartbeat. Then, "Road landing possible if lines are down and span is clear 150 feet. Can you confirm?" I looked at the road and shook my head. "Negative," Alma said. "Lines are live or present." "Copy. We have limited fuel. Advise your status." Alma looked at me, and I heard myself answer. "Stable," I said. "We are stable." The helicopter made one more circle, low enough that I could see the harness lines inside, and the shape of the pilot's helmet. Then it pointed its nose toward the west, and went. The sound drained out of the field. We let our breath leave in a controlled way, because that is how you tell your own body that everything you are feeling is not a command. Night carried heat lightning near the horizon with no rain. We did not second-guess the choice. There are calls you can only make once. A road landing would have brought every moving thing in a mile to the center line. A rotor wash would have pulled a forest of dust and paper and whatever else moved, and we would have been in the middle of it trying to guess what came out of that cloud. The tower is a lid over our small space. Lids keep things in as well as out. We chose the lid. Our plan did not end there. We made a new rule. If the helicopter returned and asked for a specific landing zone within a distance we could reach with time to prepare the ground, we would go. That meant we needed a go kit at the base, tools, water, 2 panels, a small med pack, and a radio battery in a sealed tub hidden in brush with a mark only we understood. It meant we needed caching points along the way in case we had to drop weight or hide. It meant we practiced a controlled descent where everyone had one job and did not rush. We did not romanticize it. We wrote the steps on a card. During the next week, the infected drifted in more often. It was not a siege in the way the word suggests, but it was the same problem scaled down. A steady pressure that tries to make you use up energy solving each small piece. We refused to spend what we could save. We stayed quiet. We let them move along. When groups thickened, we used the wind chimes and a small hand-cranked siren mounted under the platform to seed noise away from our spot. Humans, even changed by illness, still follow sound. A minute of sound 50 yards off is better than a second of sound next to your ladder. A larger storm arrived on a Sunday. The forecast on the Weather Channel we had captured ran its cycle, and then the wind answered it. At 4:30 p.m, dark like late evening, a line of rain hit hard enough to slap the skin. The tower shifted and set like it had been made to do only this. Lightning found the field twice, ground strike not far away. The power in our lines flickered as the controller tried to do what it was designed to do. I dropped the panels to a flatter angle and tied them. Water slashed through the gutter and thundered into the barrel. The overflow ran down the drain holes we had drilled. The trench lines filled and then ran. The infected came again, more than before, some of them stumbling, others moving with purpose. The rain muffled them. The lightning showed them. One figure reached the lower ladder, slipped, and fell into the muck with a sound I felt in my knees. Another came over the hose barrier and crawled like a person going under a fence. Caleb watched with eyes that knew this was not a test, and that he still had to act like it was. Derek stood by the shelter plate with a pry bar ready to seat it if any hands got high. Alma held a length of line that we could drop with weighted knots to push a face back from a rung without needing to go over the rail. We did not need the line. The storm did the pushing for us. Then the worst thing that could happen without something breaking happened. Lightning struck a transformer down the road. The flash took the sky for itself for a quarter second. Then the sound came like distance collapsing. A tongue of blue flared, the transformer blew, and the poles went black. The instant after, everything turned to the kind of quiet that comes only after a machine you have heard your whole life stops. The driveway sensor receiver chirped and died. The radio's backlight blinked and steadied. The tower felt alone in a way it had not before. We held until the edge passed, and the rain turned from a battering to a persistent white noise. The ground under the hose barrier had turned to soup. The infected moved through it with the patience of things that don't get tired the same way we do. We made a controlled decision to use the tool we had prepared and hope not to need. Derek handed me the long lighter. I made sure our line of retreat was clear and that our gear was pulled back from the rail. Alma nodded, shouldered the radio, and watched the wind. Now, she said, because she is used to calling a time. I reached down from the leg platform and lit the first trench, then the second, then the third, in a line, not a circle. Diesel is slow to ignite. I kept the flame on the rag we had placed, watched the blue creep to orange and backed away. Heat rolled. Smoke took the space above the trenches and moved with the wind. The infected at the ladder stepped back, not because of fear, but because physics moves everything that can move. They drifted away, as a group would drift if a street closed. We kept the fire small, monitored it, and let it burn out as the rain took what it wanted. Nothing else needed to burn. When the last glow went black and the air smelled like a garage, after someone ran an engine with the door open for a moment, we checked our lines and made a list of repairs. No one cheered. There was nothing to celebrate. The storm had tested our design. The design had held. That is the quiet outcome a person who builds things learns to want. 2 mornings later, we heard rotor noise again. It came from the northeast this time, fainter, as if the aircraft were farther away or holding altitude. The radio crackled on the emergency channel. All parties with a clear line of sight to the Jefferson Base corridor. We have established a temporary landing zone at County Route D and State 28 at 1400 hours. If you can move safely and are within 5 miles, present with a visible marker, limit to 4 persons per pickup, no exceptions. Alma looked at me, then at the map we had drawn with road names and our own notes. The intersection was 4.3 miles as the crow flies, 6 by the path we could take with the least tree cover. We could not make 6 miles in the mud and back with safety in one window. We did not debate, because debating would not change the math. We stayed. That afternoon, we did something simple instead of something dramatic. We raised a reflective panel and held a mirror at a specific angle toward the west at 1:58 p.m. And then we took it down. We wanted whoever was in that aircraft to mark the tower on their mental map as occupied, organized, and cautious. That is sometimes the best introduction a person can make. The season turned a small degree at a time. Days were still warm. Nights were a little less generous when the wind moved. Our work shifted to include maintenance that had nothing to do with crisis and everything to do with staying. We chipped loose rust from the platform bars and painted them with what paint we had left, because water and time do not stop doing what they do just because other things feel urgent. We rotated the drums to keep water from turning flat. We cleaned the stove jets. We checked ropes for chafe and melted ends. Tamsin taught Caleb to label bins neatly, because a neat label saves minutes that you cannot get back later. Richard and I took down the antenna mast and added a proper bracket we scavenged from a yard sign post, so the mast did not wear against the shell in a gust. In the quiet, Alma told us about a patient who had asked to hear a wind chime one last time in a room where the window would not open. She found a video on her phone of wind moving through a set of tubular bells, played it near the patient's ear, and watched the pulse rate settle. She said this without trying to make it into a lesson, and maybe that is why it felt like one. That night, I let the chimes below the platform ring a little longer before I tied them. We did not go without danger. A small group of uninfected people came near one afternoon and made a semicircle around the base at a distance that was careful in only one way. They called up, asked us to share batteries, asked us to lower a bag of rice, said they would trade later. They wanted the ladder, and that fact sat between every word. We did not lower anything. We said we were not a storehouse. We said we could tell them where to look for panels at the quarry and how to wire a charge controller that would not cook a battery. They did not want instructions. They wanted the short path up to our platform. When they realized they were not going to get it, they left fast enough to tell me they had been ready to try something else. We checked our ropes twice that night. The end, when it came, was not really an end. It was a transition that looked like the beginning of something new. The helicopter came again near noon on a bright day with good air. It hovered and moved along the corridor, then turned and came back until it was directly above us at what felt like the lowest height they could hold with safety. The radio voice spoke our location by description. Tower at the drainage basin with the raised ladder and fixed solar array. This is Jefferson Base 2. We can vector a ground team in 48 hours if you can mark an approach and hold. We have limited fuel and limited lift. Confirm 4 souls. Alma looked at us, counted like a checklist and said, confirmed 4. We can hold. We did not celebrate. We prepared. We tightened lines, checked the barrels, and packed the go tub at the base with a second stove and a coil of wire and a copy of our labels in a Ziploc bag. If someone reached this place after we left, I wanted them to understand what each bin held, even if they did not speak our voices. We wrote a message on a sheet of metal and bolted it to the inner face of the platform, where a person would see it if they climbed to rest at the ladder's end. We used this tower as a safe haven. The ladder is cut for safety. Repairs below are deliberate. Water catch is functional. Barrels are clean. Lines are set in a pattern that makes sense to someone who has worked in a garden. Move slowly. Be careful. If you are here, I wish you time. 48 hours is a long time to wait, when the shape of your next days may change. We set watches. We slept in shifts. We did not talk about what we would do if the ground team did not come, because talking about that would not change our readiness for if it did. At 1:10 p.m. on the second day, dust rose on the road in 2 places. Vehicles moved at a steady speed, not fast, not slow, as if their drivers had been trained to keep engines in a particular range for a reason. A truck in front, another behind. They stopped before the basin. 4 people stepped out. 2 with long guns carried in a way that said training rather than threat. The lead wore a vest with a patch that read guard. He called up, "Tower Group, we are here to facilitate transport to Jefferson Base. If you want that, we can also coordinate supplies if you intend to remain." The choice was not made for us by desperation, it was ours. We had built something that worked. Leaving it felt like setting down a tool that still had strength in it. Staying meant committing to a horizon that might narrow to just this rise and this platform. We stood in a small circle around the stove that had boiled enough water to keep 4 people human. We said what we each wanted without dressing it up. Alma wanted a clinic with walls. Derek wanted an engine he did not have to guess at every day before he turned the key. Tamsin wanted a room with books she could put in order and a table with a light that did not need the sun to work. Richard wanted to wire a building with help. Caleb looked at the horizon and then at us and said that he wanted us to stay together. I wanted to know that if I went to sleep, the ladder would still be there when I woke. That could be true here or somewhere else. I looked over the rail at the ground team and then up at the mast I had mounted, the panels I had screwed down, the barrels we had strapped, the labels that would make sense to someone who thinks in lists. "We go," I said, "but we do it right." We lowered the rope ladder to the last rung. We packed light because we knew weight steals time in a move. We left the barrels full because water is weight, and the next person might need the head start more than we needed the feeling of taking everything with us. We left the pulley, the mast, and the panel rack because those are scaffolds a person can step into. We climbed down slowly with our harnesses on because habit keeps your bones inside your skin. On the ground, the guard lead counted us, asked our names, wrote them down with a small pencil in a notebook that had seen weather. He looked at the tower with the same respect a person gives a tool that looks simple until you try to use it. Before we got in the truck, I pulled the cover from the last drum and dipped a cup. I poured a little water onto the ladder's lowest rung and watched it run down the steel. It left a clean track where my boot had marked it weeks ago. The guard lead raised an eyebrow. "Just making sure it still wants to live," I said. He nodded, because he did not need the full explanation to understand what I meant. As we rolled out, I looked back and saw the tower standing like it had for decades. The only difference being that a man who used to certify welds had turned it into a shelter and then had the nerve to leave it for someone else. The wind moved the chimes under the platform, and for a second I imagined someone hearing them from the road and looking up and deciding to trust something again. We turned onto the main route and headed toward Jefferson Base, toward a place with heavier tools and more voices, and a schedule someone had written on a board. My hands rested on my knees, still, not from certainty, but from the simple fact that the truck rode smooth and there was nothing to grip. On the outskirts of the county line, the radio clicked. The voice from the air days ago came through cleaner than before, not because the signal had improved, but because my head was not flooded. "Ground team, advise arrival window," it said. The driver answered like a person who had said these words 100 times. "ETA 20 minutes. The voice came back. "Copy. We have a landing window at 3 p.m. I looked at the clock on the dash. It read 2:40 p.m. I understood that in a world of broken schedules, someone had made a new one, and it had room for us in it. I do not know what will come next. I know that calendars may be printed, and others may be erased, and that the list in my pocket will change. I know the tower will stand until wind and time say otherwise. I know that if I ever have to build another safe haven, the first lines I draw will be the simple ones. Height, distance, water, power, silence, watch. I know that if someone else climbs those steel legs and reads the label I left and drinks the water I caught, then whatever we did up there made sense beyond the four of us and the boy who asked for us to stay together. We did not light a flare. We did not wave as the helicopter came down later that afternoon in an open school field outside Jefferson City, with the grass cut short by someone who made a point of doing it regularly. We stood at the edge and listened to the blades push the air into a shape that made sense again. A crew chief gave us ear protection and gestured with simple hand signals. We climbed in when asked. The pilot glanced back once as if to count. As we lifted, Alma squeezed my forearm once, just enough to register and let go. The town fell away beneath us. The roads became lines, and the tower became a dot that only someone who knows where to look could point to. The radio voice said the words we had hoped to hear without asking at the expense of someone else. Heading to Jefferson Base, survivors confirmed. It sounded like a sentence that had space at the end for more words later. It is not a triumph to survive. It is a plan executed one step at a time, with space left for the part that will not behave. I will sleep tonight on the floor of a hangar or in a room someone has cleared for us, and I will think about the ladder and the way the panel rack flexed in a gust, and I will be glad that steel can be a house if you're careful. I will ask for a map and a pencil, and I will start to draw again. Not metaphors, not wish lists, but lines that hold, joints that do not complain, and a schedule of watches that assume the sun still rises and sets around 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. in October. If the world asks for another tower, I will build it. If the world asks for a clinic, Alma will open it. If an engine breaks, Derek will fix it. If a building needs wire, Richard will pull it. If a shelf needs labels, Tamsin will print them. If anything needs a person to keep time, Caleb will look at us and tell us when to move. Until then, I write this so that if you find yourself on a platform with a windbreak and a stove and a ring of water barrels marked with a pencil, you will know that someone has done this before and has left you a place to start. The ladder is short, not because the world is cruel, but because the world taught us to make it that way. If you have the strength, add one more rung for the next person when the time is right, but only when you can do it without inviting trouble you cannot manage. Make a list, protect the quiet, share work like it is food, raise your signal only when the ground is yours. Save your breath for the next climb, and remember that a tower built to deliver water can be a house if the people holding it understand what it wants to do. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.